Creepy dude in the pharmacy with a weird fetish. This happened maybe 10 years ago when I was in my early 30s. I was standing in line at the local pharmacy to get my prescriptions. This is a small town, and I am a regular there, so they know me on sight. I was behind a couple of other people in line, and there were a couple of people behind me. I kept feeling a tickle in my hair in the back of my head, but every time I looked behind me, the guy there was a few steps back and looking at the floor. This happened several times. By the time I was at the front of the line, the pharmacist told me she wanted to talk to me about my medications in the consultation room they had at the time, since converted to a bathroom. I thought this was weird because we both knew I had been on this medication for years and would be for life. Nothing new. I get back to the room and close the door, and she comes in from the door at the other side that leads from the pharmacy. She told me that the man behind me had been stepping forward, sticking his nose in my ear and smelling, before stepping back and looking at the floor. This shook me pretty badly, as this is such weird behavior, especially in my little town. The pharmacy staff insisted on having me wait there until the guy was distracted by another pharmacy employee, and they had a security guard walk me to my car and watch me drive off to make sure I was gone before Hair Sniffer came out and saw what I was driving and what direction I was going. I still use this pharmacy, and some of the same people still work there. I will always be grateful that I took the initiative to make sure I was safe that day. The pharmacy. I was 8 years old when this happened, so it is a little vague. I originally posted on Reddit Real Stranger Danger, and I decided to post it here when a Redditor suggested it. I was at a small shopping center with my mother, sister, brother, in an equally small pharmacy. The location of the pharmacy was in an area of the shopping center where barely anyone frequented unless need be. Working at the pharmacy was a man and a woman, both either being in their late 30s or early 40s, and at the time, my family were the only customers inside the pharmacy. Both were exceptionally friendly to my mother, my siblings, and myself, but I had a strange gut feeling about them, and did not like them instantly. Me being 8 years old, I didn't care much for them or anything else at the time, except for the variety of lollies they sold at the front of the counter. My mother finished what she was doing, and motioned for us kids to leave. My siblings followed, whilst I lingered, looking at the lollies still. I remember looking back and forth between the lollies and disappearing from my family. I think I'll be able to catch up with them very, very soon. Both the woman and the man came up to me after my family had left, talking to me, but I couldn't hear what they were saying, as I knew something was off. Since I was quite young at the time, the memory is quite vague, but their body language was off, and they were closing in on me at an eerie speed. All I remember was the woman bowing down a bit to be face level with me, saying something to me and looking up at the man who was behind me, which I realized too late, telling him to grab her. He put his hand over my mouth, and because I was a child and nearly covered my face, the man restrained me by holding me to himself, while the lady said, "Shh, everything is going to be okay." In that split moment, two very distinct thoughts ran into my head. One, my poor mother has too much to worry about and doesn't need to worry about where I am. On top of that, number two, I thought this stuff only happens on TV. I struggled against the man when I thought about my mother, and also how much trouble I'd be with my mother if I got kidnapped. Yes, I was 8. My priorities were very, very different. They let me go very easily, and I ran until I was in the more populated area of the shopping center where I knew my mother would be. It was a very short run, but I was puffed up from the experience. My mother made no comment on my state or absence, and I was grateful. She probably thought nothing of it, as I was a kid, most likely just running around doing what kids do, you know? I never told her what had just happened. Even though I was young, I did not want to worry her or put stress on her. To put things into perspective, my mother raised 8 children all by herself. At the time, my father had run off and just left her to look after all of us, who were all under the age of 15, without complaint. Yet she cannot hide the toll of what she did to her and the kids, and kids no more than adults think. I was also trying to make sense of what had just happened. I was very confused and truly believed that things like that only happen on TV, and not to me or anyone else that I would know. I also thought of how easily they let me go, and the more I thought about it at the time, the more unsure I got of whether or not it actually even happened. Every so often, in a couple years, I would think about that instant, and since I was older, I was able to rationalize some of it, like why they let me go so easily. For example, we were close to the entrance of the store where at any time someone may walk past and see or hear me if I scream, right? I'm 25 years old now and don't think much of it anymore, but it came back to me when I was reading Real Stranger Danger subreddit. Just addressing some comments that may come up here that came up in the other subreddit. Why didn't you report it? Please reread over my story again as I've explained there. I was also 8 years old, and when you're young, you actually think you're getting in trouble for this happening to you. Didn't your mother notice you were gone? The story may seem long written down, but it happened in a few minutes, and because of that, it's not really enough time for a mother to get worried yet. It was also the 90s, where people weren't as paranoid as of today. But we're getting there in that time. We were also taught to always follow our mother too, and because there were 8 of us there, we knew at a young age that it was hard for my mother to keep track of all of us, and instantly made it easier for her, as best as a kid could, of course. She probably thought I was already tagging along, or was pausing to look at something, and that I would eventually come back. Regardless, I never went back and waited on the chairs, scattered around the shopping center for shoppers to rest, of course in the populated area. Safe to say, I never saw them again. Their pharmacy closed down, and we will never meet. A bottle of death. Stalked by a stranger, the whole story. Okay, this is the entire story all in one place. No cliffhangers or sequels anywhere in sight. I had just graduated high school, and my best friend and I were planning to move into an apartment near the university, in which we would be attending in the fall. On our drive to check out an apartment downtown, a car pulled out in front of my friend, and we hit it going 50 miles per hour. The seatbelt tore the cartilage in my chest, and I couldn't breathe properly for a bit. My friend had jammed her knee into the dashboard. We were both taken to the hospital. I was okay, but my friend's knee was hurt pretty badly. I called my mother to come and pick me up. When she arrived, we walked over to the hospital pharmacy to fill my prescription of muscle relaxers that would help with the pain from the seatbelt injury. As soon as we exited the pharmacy with my prescription bottle in my hand, he appeared. He was tall, probably 6'3", and thin. He was in his 30s, and looked like a straggly John Lennon. He had the round glasses and everything, except he seemed to hunch over a bit. He was a cross between Riff Raff from Rocky Horror Picture Show and John Lennon. "Hey, I know you," he said to me. My mom stared at me, slightly pissed that I would be known to a man in his 30s. "No you don't," I said. "Yeah I do. What's your name again?" he asked. "Jennifer," I said. Not my name. "Yeah, Jennifer. I do know you. Hey, what you got there?" he asked, nodding to my prescription bottle I was carrying. "A bottle of death?" He would call me Jennifer for 3 fucking years. At this point, my mom and I realized the guy was nuts, and picked up our pace, nearly running out to our car. He picked up his pace and scuffled after us, nearly reaching the car as we jumped in and sped off. We drove home talking about the creepy experience. We laughed a bit at how my mom thought I really did know him and was going to ground me. We thought it would end there, and we would never see the guy again. A month passed, and my friend and I moved into an apartment. I had all but forgotten about the creepy riff-raff Lennon encounter. Then one day, I was walking out of 7-Eleven and realized the man holding the door for me looked familiar. He stood there with his weird grin. I smiled and walked to my car. "Hi, Jennifer," he hissed at me. I jumped in my car and glared at him. Over the next few weeks, my friend and I started noticing him all the time. He seemed to be everywhere I was. I remember having coffee with some friends on the patio of a local coffee place. He strolled past us, sat at a table nearby, and pretended like he was part of our conversations. My roommate and I left in a hurry. He chased us to our car. Things escalated from there. One day I was at work. I work at the body shop in the mall, and he showed up at the doorway and just stared in at me. The store manager made him leave. A few days after that, I pulled up to my apartment and spotted what I thought was his car right in front of my building. I parked a block behind and tried to get a good look at him. Sure enough, it was him, just sitting in front of my house. I took off as he chased me. He knew where I lived, he knew where I worked, he knew where I hung out, who my friends were, and now he was chasing me in my car. I should note here that this happened in 1991. Stalking laws did not exist. It was an incredibly odd situation to be stalked by a complete stranger. My dad lived rather close to me, so I went to his apartment. There was an underground parking garage, and the doors of the building from there needed a code. I drove around and saw that my dad's car wasn't there. His condo was on a one-way street. When I left, the stalker was waiting at the next street and sped up behind me. I drove to a friend's house that was a little ways away. I seemed to have lost the stalker at some point. The friend wasn't home, so I asked her mom if I could hang out there for a bit and call my dad. When I reached him, he said to come to his house immediately. I headed over and still saw no sign of the stalker. I went up to my dad's condo, and he suggested we go drive around to see if we could find the guy's car and at least get a license plate number or something like that. That way we could file a police report. We went to the garage, got in my dad's car, and the automatic door opened. Right then, the stalker's car was driving down the narrow, one-way alley to my dad's garage. I started yelling, "That's him! Oh my god, that's him, Dad!" My dad pulled a golf club from the back seat, jumped out of his car, and ran to the stalker's car, screaming at him to hand over his keys. Meanwhile, the garage door was opening, closing, and opening because we were parked right in the middle of the doorway. The stalker was nearly crying. "Don't hurt me, sir! Don't hurt me!" He was wailing as he frantically rolled up his window. My dad was an intimidating guy, and I'd never seen him so angry. He just kept screaming at the guy to hand over his keys and to get out of the car. Finally, the guy gave in. He stepped out and handed my dad his keys. My dad grabbed him by his shirt and yanked him through the doorway to his building. The garage door was still opening and closing. I was frozen. Oh my god, my dad is gonna murder this guy. He's gonna kill him and bring out his dead body. I imagined having to go with my dad and bury this guy in a desert somewhere. I moved over to the driver's seat and pulled his car into a parking spot and waited. I had no idea what to do. Some time passed, and my dad finally emerged with the stalker guy still alive. He opened the door and told me to get in the back seat. He then tossed the stalker into the passenger seat and walked around to the driver's side. The stalker was strangely calm, flustered, but much calmer than he should have been. My dad pulled out of the garage and started driving. Now, the conversation in the car was bizarrely hilarious. The stalker would not shut up. "Where are we going, sir? Where are you taking me? I see you like golf. I'm sure in another situation that you and I would be friends." My dad told him to shut up and asked him what the hell he thought he was doing following a teenage girl all over town for weeks on end. "I just like Jennifer. She has a nice car and I think she's really pretty," he said and shrugged his shoulders. That was a long 10-minute drive to the police station. My dad dragged him inside and told the cops to come and get him for assault. The cops took Stalker Dude in the back and then brought us to a little room to take our statement. They explained that there were no laws against following someone. He would have to do something to hurt me before they could do anything about it. They said that they were sure he was scared as hell and wouldn't be coming around anymore. They gave us a case number and we left. You'd think it would be over, right? I went home and filled my roommates in on everything that happened. A few friends came over, and I was sitting outside with a couple of them. We were talking about everything with the guy and how scary it all was. I'll never forget one comment from a friend. "Isn't some part of you flattered that a stranger would go through all that trouble?" I lost it. "Are you kidding me? Flattered? This man is not sane and I am in danger. There's nothing flattering about any of this." I looked up just in time to see the stalker drive right past my house. Now this is only the first 3 to 4 months. After the situation with my dad, his appearance slowed, but definitely did not stop. He was still around, but kept more of a distance. The end of the school year came, and my roommate was moving to Seattle. This was the summer of 1992. Still no stalking laws in place. I moved out on my own. One afternoon, I took my dog out for a walk. As soon as I stepped off the porch, I saw him. His car was parked in front of my apartment, and he waved. I ran inside and called the police. I was told they couldn't do anything. I explained what happened with my dad and how long it's been going on. Sorry man, we'll make note of it, but we can't come out. I watched from my front window as he stared in at my apartment. It progressed from there. He started coming to my work. He would sit outside of my house across the street on my neighbor's grass. He was everywhere. It was maddening. I couldn't even take my dog outside. I was constantly in fear. He never threatened me or anything like that. He rarely said a word. He was just always there. One morning I was leaving for work, and there he was again, walking in the street in front of my house. I became so angry I screeched my Jeep out of my driveway and nearly knocked him over. I started screaming out my window for him to leave me the fuck alone. I wanted nothing to do with him. He smiled, put his hand in his pocket, and strolled away with a skip in his step. When I got home that night, he was back. There was nothing I could do or say to make it stop. I knew the danger I was in, but I was helpless. It went on like this for another year. He would drop away for a few months, then reappear and start up again. I had 25 case numbers written on a paper hanging on my fridge. Each time I called the police, that's all they would give me. I was starting to go a little mad. I was afraid all the time. The mall where I worked issued a trespass order to him, so he couldn't go inside. That was my safe place. Then he disappeared. It had been 6 months since I'd seen him. One day, my phone rang. It was a detective who asked if he could meet me regarding the stalker. His name was Michael. I met him at his office, and he said how sorry he was that my situation had been going on for so long. He brought out a file that was at least 3 inches thick. He told me how dangerous this guy was. He had been charged of domestic violence. He was married and had 2 little kids, kidnapping. He was a long-time patient at the local mental health clinic. The detective said he couldn't believe how lucky I was that he never tried to hurt me. Apparently the guy had been arrested for an assault and had been in jail for a period of time. That's how the detective found out about me. He wanted to present my case to the district attorney. New laws were being passed and they thought my case could be prosecuted. Immediately after that meeting, I moved into a new building with tight security. The guy was out of jail and I didn't want to take any chances. Within 2 months he found me again. I contacted the detective and he said he was trying to get the district attorney to take it on, but there were no guarantees. I couldn't take it anymore. I moved home to my mom's house 40 miles away. I stayed there for a year, and during that time I met my now husband. We decided to move out into a house downtown. My husband knew all about the stalker situation. Luckily, I hadn't seen him in well over a year. One night, we were playing pool at a bar, and who walks in? Michael the stalker. He puts his hands in the air as soon as he saw me, and started walking backwards out of the bar. I'm leaving. I didn't know you were here. I'm sorry. I'm leaving. Don't call the police. I was on edge again for weeks, but he never showed up again. I don't know what happened or why he got so panicked when he saw me that night. I questioned my dad heavily for years after it all happened. Come on, Dad. You found him and threatened him or something, didn't you? Admit it. He always just laughed and told me I thought he was more of a superhero than he was. 10 years passed, and my husband and I moved a few times. We were back in the same neighborhood I lived in when all the stalking took place. I had 2 little kids now. We were at the grocery store, and there he was. I panicked at the thought of him seeing me. He seemed completely out of it, like someone with a lobotomy. He was zombie walking and didn't even notice me. And that was the last time I ever saw him. Pharmacy freaks. I worked at a pharmacy for a few years and met some incredibly odd people. Some were harmless, such as the old lady who would talk to your ear off about owls until you could manage to escape. Others, however, were not as innocent in their weirdness. Once, I was ringing out first in supplies for a customer who noticed I had a greenish tint to his skin and actually put me in mind of Frankenstein's monster because of his size and build and just his odd look. As I was handling him change, he asked, "Do you wonder why my skin is green?" I politely as possible told him that the thought had crossed my mind. So he began to tell me he had a certain disease that I had never heard of and can't remember what he called it now. Then he asked if he knew how I got the disease, to which I replied no. He said, "By having sex with dogs. I have sex with dogs. Then he grabbed his bag of supplies and walked out, like it was just a normal thing to say. Another strange person was our mailman. I am a friendly, talkative kind of girl. I try to make everyone feel important and appreciated. Well, apparently the mailman we had mistook that as me being flirtatious with him. I noticed he had started spending more and more time in the pharmacy chit-chatting with me when he delivered our mail. I didn't really think anything creepy of it, though. One day my husband had sent me roses just for no reason. The mailman came in and saw them, and asked me who they were from. I told him my husband had sent them. He asked if my husband was good to me and if I loved him. I told him he was the greatest husband ever, and I didn't know what I could do without him, and I loved him dearly. He wanted to know how long we'd been married. I told him. He wanted to know where my husband worked. I told him. Then he started to ask more details about my husband's job, wanted to know if he ever worked nights or were out of town, what time he left and got home, etc. After a while, I started to become more vague with my answers, and he finally left. I told my husband about our slightly odd conversation when I got home that evening. He immediately told me the guy sounded too into me, and he thought maybe he just wanted to see if I was ever home alone, so he could come over or something. I brushed it off. After all, it was just a nice middle-aged mailman, although he was a big man. The next week, I had walked about 2 blocks down to a fast food restaurant for lunch. As I'm sitting by a window, all of a sudden there he is waving and smiling in the window at me. So I waved back in a completely uninterested way. The next thing I know, he came into the restaurant and sat down at my table. He said he was looking for me, and was so glad he found me. I really didn't know what to say, so I just told him I had only about a minute before I had to get back to work and excused myself. For the next few weeks, it seemed like every time I turned around, he would be there, even when I wasn't working. It was really starting to get annoying and a little scary, to be honest. Then as quickly as it started, he just stopped. He would come in, drop off the mail without even a word, and I was fine with that. One of the creepiest repeat customers we had was an overweight guy in his 50s. His pale white skin and blondish white hair always looked oily, and his teeth were big, pointy, and very yellow. He was a creep and a half, always hugging every younger female he could corner, and they weren't friendly little hugs. It was like a full-body feel-up, and you could feel violated and nasty kind of hugs. It didn't matter how much you resisted or told him no. He would force it. My coworkers would warn me, and the other young girls that I worked with, if they saw him coming, so to get up behind the counter where he couldn't reach us. He totally made my skin crawl. I could go on and on. There were so many creepers I met while working there.